The old Ford pickup rumbled over the last hill. Crestwood appeared, unchanged yet heavy with memory. The water tower still stood, home of the Fighting Owls, watching over a town that felt both achingly familiar and foreign. My life in the city had unraveled quietly, leaving me with nothing but the urge to return to the place I once swore I'd never need again. Pulling up to my grandmother's house, now mine, the peeling paint and silent porch swing greeted me like old ghosts. The air was thick with honeysuckle and memory. The key in my hand felt like both a burden and a permission slip. I could almost see my grandmother on the porch, hear my grandfather's laugh, memories woven into the fabric of this place. With a deep breath, I stepped out, knowing that walking through that door meant facing every messy, beautiful chapter of my story. It was time to stop running. It was time to come home to myself. The front door creaked open, releasing a gust of stale air. Inside, time had stood still. Unpacking boxes, I realized I was unpacking more than belongings. Each object was heavy with old expectations and failures. My achievements, my old relationship, all felt like artifacts of a life lived for others. I had become an expert at wearing armor. Achievement, being easy, always smiling. But it was exhausting, and it had failed me. In the quiet, I saw the connection between my mother's fear and my own terror of taking up space, my father's silence and my pattern of choosing unavailable partners. These family patterns were invisible threads, pulling me in directions I never chose. For the first time, I let the shame and sadness wash over me. I didn't push it away. Among the boxes and ghosts, I was finally ready to look at the threads. I was ready to see what needed to be unraveled, and maybe what could be rewoven. We all tell ourselves stories about who we are. These stories become the silent background music of our lives, shaping how we see ourselves and the world around us, often without us even realizing it. Mine was resilience and strength, or so I thought. But beneath that surface, there was a deeper legacy. One that whispered, your needs are inconvenient, your feelings a burden, and that showing pain was a sign of weakness. These stories didn't start with me. They were passed down, written in my grandmother's jaw, my mother's sighs, and the quiet moments when words were left unsaid. Generations carried these beliefs, sometimes without ever questioning them. Childhood memories surfaced. My blanket fort dismantled, my creativity dismissed as a mess. The small joys of childhood often overshadowed by the need to keep things tidy, to not make trouble, to fit in. A failed test met not with comfort, but with pressure to be perfect. Mistakes weren't seen as part of learning, but as proof that I wasn't enough, that I had to try harder, be better, never let my guard down. These moments became the bricks of my inner world, quietly stacking up over the years. They shaped my sense of worth, how I loved, how I worked, and the way I spoke to myself when no one else was listening. My filter was scarcity and fear. Love was conditional. Belonging had to be earned. Vulnerability was weakness. I learned to hide parts of myself, to shrink so I wouldn't take up too much space. But returning to Crestwood, the place where so many of these stories began, I realized I had a choice. I could see the old patterns for what they were, echoes of the past, not the truth of who I am. I could keep living inside this old story, letting it define every step I took, or I could write a new one. I could choose to believe something different about myself. I could choose joy, not just survival. I could let myself feel happiness without guilt, and allow lightness into spaces that had always felt heavy. I could choose to see my worth as inherent, not conditional. I could learn to accept myself, flaws and all, and offer myself the compassion I'd always craved. The past was a script, but I could pick up the pen. I could become the narrator of my own life, not just an actor in someone else's story. I could become the author of a truer story, one that honored where I came from, but also made space for who I wanted to be. One with room for joy, for laughter, for connection, and for the freedom to be fully myself. One with room for me, and that changed everything. The imprint of yesterday may linger, but today I choose to write a new chapter. Just as the silence threatened to swallow me whole, Sarah appeared, 2 steaming coffees in hand, the same lopsided grin she wore when we were kids. In that moment, her presence felt like a lifeline tossed into deep water, a reminder that I wasn't alone, even when I felt most invisible. She never left Crestwood, choosing instead to build a life rooted in honesty, small joys, and the kind of community where everyone knows your name. Her days were filled with simple routines, but her heart was open to everyone around her. Sarah listened as I stumbled through my story of collapse, her eyes never leaving mine. She named what she saw without judgment. "You've always tried to be everything to everyone," she said, her voice gentle but unwavering. She remembered things I'd long forgotten, my self-neglect, always disguised as strength, the way I'd put others first until I disappeared in the process. Her memory was a gentle mirror, reflecting back the parts of me I'd lost. Our walks became my lifeline. We talked about fears, not just dreams. In the quiet of the woods, I found space to breathe, to say things I'd never dared to say aloud. "That's shame," she said. "The only way to beat it is to talk about it, to bring it into the light where it can't grow." Her words made the darkness feel less heavy, less permanent. With Sarah, I didn't need armor. I could be messy, scared, uncertain. And she leaned in, never flinching from my vulnerability. Her acceptance was unconditional. She held up a mirror, showing me that the courage I thought I lacked was actually in telling my story, in letting myself be seen, flaws and all. She didn't try to fix me, she simply created a safe space for me to start fixing myself, one honest conversation at a time. That's the power of friendship, a sacred space to practice being our whole, imperfect selves. True connection heals, and in that healing, we find hope. It's where we find the courage to be seen, to let go of old stories and step into new ones. And it's where, step by step, we begin to heal. Together. Facing my family felt like preparing for battle. My heart pounding, palms sweaty, mind racing with memories of old arguments and words left unsaid. There were years of walls built to protect from old wounds, invisible barriers that kept us from truly seeing each other. My brother Mark was coming for dinner, our relationship always distant, defined by silent competition and unspoken resentments that lingered in the air. But I decided to try something new, something that felt risky but necessary. I entered the arena without my armor. Conversation started safe, circling around weather and work, but the tension was there, just beneath the surface. I took a breath and shared how I always felt too much, like my emotions were a burden, and that I never quite fit in. I always had to be small, shrinking myself to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to not take up too much space. To my surprise, Mark didn't get defensive. He didn't brush it off or change the subject. He got quiet, he looked at me, really looked. And for a moment, the years of distance seemed to shrink away. He said, "I always thought you were the brave one. I never realized you felt that way. I never knew how to feel." In that moment, I saw a vulnerability in him I'd never noticed before. The wall between us began to crumble, brick by brick, as we let our guards down and allowed ourselves to be seen. We saw each other not as rivals, but as two people shaped by the same childhood, each carrying our own scars. We were just two kids who learned to cope in different ways, both longing for acceptance and understanding. That conversation didn't fix everything and it didn't erase the past, but it opened a door that had been closed for far too long. It was a seismic shift, a small act of courage that changed the way we saw each other. Vulnerability created an opening for honesty, and honesty made space for real connection to grow. We were no longer playing old roles, no longer trapped by the stories we told ourselves. We were just siblings, finally talking, finally listening. Family is where the real healing happens. It's terrifying to show up as your true self, to risk being misunderstood or rejected. But it's also where we discover each other's hidden stories, the truths we've carried alone for years, and it's where connection becomes possible, where forgiveness and understanding can finally take root. Right in the beautiful mess of family life, in the chaos and the laughter, we find moments of grace. Sometimes, that's all it takes to begin again. A single honest conversation, a willingness to be seen, and the courage to step in with an open heart. Most of my life I treated feelings as problems to solve or hide. In my grandmother's quiet house with no distractions, my feelings surfaced, and this time I got curious. I practiced simply feeling, sitting with sadness, naming grief, letting anger move through me. I learned my anger wasn't a flaw, but a signal, a boundary crossed, a need unmet. By naming my emotions, I took away their power to overwhelm me. I realized denying feelings only denies a part of myself. Sitting with them, listening, they became my teachers. They showed me what I needed, what I valued, where to draw lines. The courage to feel is the courage to be whole. It's the foundation of an authentic life. We are human, sad, scared, angry, joyful. When we own our emotional truths, we come home to ourselves, and that is where healing begins. Healing isn't a destination, It's a practice, a series of small, conscious choices. It started with tiny shifts, saying no when I was tired, volunteering at the library for joy, not approval. I practiced being present, listening without agenda, connecting for its own sake. The biggest change was how I spoke to myself, replacing the inner critic with a kinder voice. When I made mistakes, I offered myself grace as I would a friend. Wholehearted living is built on these small acts. Setting boundaries, being imperfect, trying new things, resting when needed, speaking truth. It's not about grand gestures, but daily commitment to living in alignment with my values. It's about showing up for my one precious life. In the practice, not the perfection, I found my way back to myself. Each small act was a step toward wholeness. Each day, a chance to choose courage over comfort. That's how healing happens. One small act at a time. There's freedom in understanding our past. Not to blame, but to see clearly. The patterns we learned were survival strategies, not life sentences. My mother's anxiety, my father's silence, they were doing the best they could. Understanding this released the shame and let me forgive, not just them, but myself for believing old stories. Now, when old patterns surface, I pause, recognize them, and choose differently. The past is a teacher, not a prison. We can't change what happened, but we can change the story we tell ourselves. In changing the story, we change everything. We become the authors of our own future. We are free to write an ending filled with courage, compassion, and connection. That is the ultimate freedom. The old house isn't haunted anymore. It feels like home. The ghosts are just parts of the story, integrated and understood. I sit on the porch swing, watching fireflies, not hiding from the world, but present in it. Healing is messy, non-linear. There are still days when old shame returns, but now I recognize it. The goal isn't to banish darkness, but to learn how to turn on the light of self-awareness and compassion. My life isn't perfect, but it's real and authentic. My relationships are deeper, rooted in vulnerability. I find joy in simple moments, coffee, rain, honest conversation. I'm learning to live with an open heart, embracing both joy and sorrow. The journey back to Crestwood was a journey back to myself. We can't numb pain without numbing joy. To live wholeheartedly, we must feel it all, face our shadows, and choose connection. Change is always possible. We can rise strong, rewrite our stories, and choose courage. A new dawn is always waiting to break.